Imagine witnessing, like, the impossible. You survive the most traumatic, paradigm-shattering week of your entire life.
Mm.
You see things that they defy the laws of physics.
Right, yeah. Completely life-altering stuff.
Exactly. And then, a few days later, you go back to your old day job. It feels completely anticlimactic. But, well, that's exactly where we find ourselves today. Welcome to the deep dive. May God bless your day, and may He deeply bless the entire week you have ahead of you. It's really fantastic to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. We are digging into an incredibly fascinating piece of ancient literature today.
We really are. We have a stack of historical and textual analysis drawn from the Holman and the NAA study Bibles, and we're focusing entirely on the final chapter of the Gospel of John, chapter 21.
Right, which, if you're familiar with the text, you know it acts as an epilogue.
Yeah, but we're totally bypassing that surface level, Sunday school gloss today. We're looking at the historical, the linguistic, and really the deeply psychological mechanisms layered in this text. I mean, it has everything from ancient PR crisis management to, like, sensory memory triggers.
It's wild because, epilogues are generally utilized just to tie up loose narrative ends,
Yeah.
right? But this chapter, it actually reorients the entire historical account. It takes this very high abstract theology and drags it down into the sand, the water, and just incredibly raw human psychology.
So let's start with that jarring transition back to normal life. The disciples have already experienced the resurrection. They've seen the impossible. But instead of immediately launching some massive, highly coordinated global movement, where do we find them?
They're back in boats.
Right, catching fish on the Sea of Galilee, or, well, the Sea of Tiberias, as it was also called.
Yeah, and we have to consider the physiological reality of the moment here. The adrenaline of the past couple of weeks has completely faded.
Oh, totally. A massive crash.
Exactly. The disciples are dealing with trauma, shock, and, like you said, massive crash in their physical and emotional energy.
It feels like a behavioral default mechanism. It reminds me of someone graduating from a super high-pressure college program, experiencing this massive life transition, and then the very next week, they're picking up shifts at their old high school retail job.
Right, yeah.
Because they're relying entirely on muscle memory. The brain just needs a break.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. I mean, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, they were literal business partners with Simon Peter in the commercial fishing trade before any of this started.
Oh, right. I always forget it was an actual business.
Yeah, it was their livelihood.
Mm.
So when the grand narrative pauses, they just default to what their hands know how to do. And we have to remember, this is grueling physical labor.
Right.
They're working the night shift. It's dark. It's wet. They're physically exhausted.
Really?
And on this particular night, it's completely fruitless. I mean, they catch absolutely nothing.
Which is so frustrating. But then dawn breaks. There's this unrecognized figure on the shore, Jesus, who calls out and tells them to cast the net on the right side of the boat. And suddenly, they haul in this massive catch.
Yeah.
And the text gives us a weirdly specific number, right? Exactly, 153 large fish. Now, my first instinct when I read ancient texts with highly specific numbers is to assume it's some sort of elaborate Da Vinci Code-style numerology.
Oh, sure, like a secret code.
Yeah, like if you multiply 153 by the Hebrew alphabet, it spells out a secret prophecy or something. Is there a hidden meaning there?
Well, it's tempting to jump to that conclusion, and commentators throughout history have certainly tried to do, like, mathematical gymnastics with that number to extract a code.
Right, I've heard some wild theories.
But the textual scholarship from our sources points to something much simpler and honestly infinitely more grounded. First-century fishermen routinely counted their catch.
Just literally counting fish.
Literally counting them. They had to, economically speaking, because they were taking these fish straight to the market to sell them fresh.
So it's not a mystical cipher. It's literally just a Tuesday morning commercial inventory.
Exactly. It's just inventory. And there's a critical historical reason for the author to include this mundane detail, too.
Oh, why is that?
In the ancient world, as oral traditions began to circulate, they often took on these mythological, exaggerated proportions.
Yeah, the fish gets bigger every time you tell the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by including the precise, seemingly random count of 153 fish, the author is stamping the text with the unmistakable mark of a first-hand eyewitness.
Oh, that makes sense.
He's communicating to the reader like, I was actually there. I felt the burn in my shoulders hauling that heavy net onto the beach, and I literally sat on the sand and counted them out 1, 2, 3, all the way to 153. It grounds a miraculous event in the everyday, verifiable reality of ancient commerce.
That completely reframes the detail for me. It's like an anchor for historical authenticity, proving it's not just a fable.
Precise.
And speaking of the physical reality of that morning, there's another detail right after the catch that initially struck me as completely backwards.
Which one?
When the beloved disciple recognizes Jesus on the shore, they're about 90 meters out, roughly 200 cubits, the text says. Peter realizes it's his master, and before he jumps into the water to swim to shore, he puts his outer garment on.
Right, he puts clothes on to swim.
Yeah. From a practical standpoint, putting on heavy first-century clothing to swim 90 meters seems like a fantastic way to drown.
Well, from a practical standpoint, it is a terrible idea.
Right.
But from a cultural standpoint, it makes perfect sense. The study notes explain that fishermen doing this grueling night shift would strip down, working in minimal clothing to, move freely and keep their good outer garments dry.
That makes sense.
But in that specific first-century Judean culture, you do not approach a teacher, a master, or certainly the Lord uncovered. It was a matter of deep respect and reverence.
Oh, wow. So Peter is essentially risking his physical safety just to ensure he's properly dressed for worship.
That is exactly the dynamic. He girds himself, plunges into the water fully dressed, and just swims to shore. It defies all physical logic, but it perfectly captures his overwhelming psychological desire to close the distance between himself and his master.
But as we all know from our own lives, physical proximity is not the same thing as relational harmony.
Absolutely not.
Peter gets to the beach, he's soaking wet, and Jesus still has to address the elephant in the room. This physical breakfast on the beach transitions into an incredibly tense psychological confrontation.
It really does.
And it starts with the sensory environment Jesus sets up. He's cooking fish and bread over a charcoal fire. The Greek word used in the text is anthrakia. Now, if we cross-reference that, the notes point out that specific word for a charcoal fire only appears one other time in the entire Gospel of John.
Yes, in John 18:18.
Right. The courtyard of the high priest, the exact spot where Peter stood warming himself by a charcoal fire and denied knowing Jesus 3 times. So Jesus is not just making breakfast here. He is essentially weaponizing olfactory memory.
The psychological brilliance of this setup, it really cannot be overstated. Sensory memory, specifically smell, bypasses the logical processing centers of the brain and taps directly into the emotional core.
Yeah, like when you smell certain perfume and it instantly takes you back to middle school.
Exactly like that. Peter steps out of the water, and the very specific smell of burning charcoal hits him. It is the exact sensory trigger of his greatest trauma and his deepest failure.
Man, that is heavy.
But Jesus brings Peter back to the sensory environment of the crime, not to punish him, but to deconstruct his emotional defenses so the psychological wound can be properly cleaned out.
That turns the whole scene from a casual morning meal into a deliberate surgical procedure.
It really does.
Which leads us directly into the actual conversation. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Now, I have to bring this up because I have heard a very specific, almost universally accepted sermon explanation of this linguistic exchange.
Let me guess, the Greek words for love.
Yes. The theory goes that Jesus uses the Greek word agapao, representing this high, divine, unconditional love. And Peter, feeling guilty, replies with filio, meaning a lesser, just like brotherly love.
Right.
So Jesus asks for 100%, Peter only offers 50%, and finally on the 3rd time, Jesus stoops down to Peter's level and just asks for filio. Does that popular interpretation actually hold up?
Well, it's a great narrative, but modern scholarship and the study notes we're using actually push back hard on that distinction.
Really? So it's not a theological vocabulary lesson?
Not at all. Modern scholars find that rigid hierarchy between agapao and filio highly unlikely to be the actual point the author is making. John frequently uses synonyms interchangeably purely for stylistic variety. As a writer, he simply avoids repeating the exact same word in close proximity if he doesn't have to.
Oh, wow. So we have essentially been reading a modern artificial distinction back into a 1st century text. Is there proof elsewhere in John's writing that he mixes these words up without implying one is better than the other?
Absolutely there is. Look at John 5:20. The text describes the Father's deep, divine, perfect love for the Son, and it uses the word filio.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If filio is strictly a lesser, flawed human love, that verse makes zero theological sense.
That's a great point.
Furthermore, we have to remember the historical reality of the conversation itself. Jesus and Peter were almost certainly speaking Aramaic to each other on that beach, not Greek.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and Aramaic does not have that same dual vocabulary distinction for love. The Greek variation we read is simply the author's translation choice after the fact.
Okay, if the tension is not about different tiers of love, where's the actual emotional weight of this exchange coming from? Because the text explicitly notes that Peter was grieved the third time.
The emotional weight is not in the vocabulary, it's in the mathematics. It's the painful, deliberate, threefold repetition.
3 denials, 3 questions.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Peter denied Jesus 3 times around a charcoal fire. Now, around another charcoal fire, Jesus is making him affirm his allegiance exactly 3 times. Every confession is systematically counteracting a denial.
That is so powerful.
And notice the action accompanying it. Jesus takes the bread and the fish and gives it to them, mirroring the role of a Jewish host acting in hospitality. He is taking a broken man and publicly restoring him, commissioning him as an under-shepherd to feed his sheep.
It's just a total holistic rehabilitation of Peter's identity. But right as Peter is handed back his leadership role, he gets hit with a devastating reality check. Because rebuilding that identity comes with a heavy cost.
Yes, it does.
Jesus prophesies Peter's eventual martyrdom, saying that when he is old, he will stretch out his hands and be led where he does not want to go. What exactly does that mean?
Stretching out the hands was a widely recognized first-century idiom for Roman crucifixion.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's an unambiguous, sobering statement about exactly how Peter's life is going to end. The historical record and early church tradition confirm this martyrdom. Even if some of the later legendary details, like Peter insisting on being crucified upside down, might be slightly embellished by later generations, the study notes remind us the martyrdom itself is a historical certainty.
So Peter is basically told, hey, you are restored to leadership, but your path ends in a violent execution. And Peter's immediate reaction is such a fascinating human psychological defense mechanism.
It's so relatable.
It really is. He turns, sees the beloved disciple John, and basically points at him and asks, Lord, what about him? I mean, it's like a sibling rivalry. I see this dynamic in corporate workplaces all the time, too.
Oh, for sure.
A manager gives an employee a massive, grueling project, and instead of processing their own assignment, the employee immediately points to their coworker and demands to know why they aren't suffering equally.
It is a profound deflection. Even after witnessing the resurrection, even after this intense, beautiful restoration, Peter is still deeply human.
He's still Peter.
He is calculating fairness. He wants to know if his peer is getting a better deal, and Jesus shuts it down immediately. He says, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me.
Essentially a first-century version of keep your eyes on your own paper.
Precisely. Focus on your own assignment. But that specific deflection and Jesus' specific response actually created a massive crisis for the first-century church.
How so?
Because of a misunderstanding of what Jesus said, a rumor spread like wildfire that John was immortal, that he would live to see the second coming and never experience physical death.
I can totally see how a game of historical telephone turns if it is my will that he remain into John has the secret to eternal life.
Exactly.
But why did the author feel the need to use precious, expensive parchment at the very end of his gospel just to correct this? I mean, if you look at it from a modern public relations perspective, having the masses think your leader is immortal seems like a pretty powerful marketing tool for a new movement.
It might seem like good marketing in the short term, but it is catastrophic for long-term stability.
Really? Why?
You have to consider the fragility of the early church's faith. If an entire community builds a foundational pillar of their belief system on the rumor that John will never die, what happens to their collective faith when John eventually, inevitably, passes away?
The whole movement collapses because they think Jesus' prophecy failed.
Exactly. It would trigger a massive, irrecoverable crisis of faith. So John essentially issues a highly specific corporate press release here to kill the rumor before his own death.
No, that's brilliant.
He explicitly clarifies the text, writing, Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but if it is my will that he remain. This highlights how fiercely the early church cared about the precise words of Jesus. John is protecting the community by saying, do not put words in the Lord's mouth or you are going to shatter your own faith when my life comes to an end.
That is ancient crisis communication at its finest. He is inoculating his followers against a future disappointment, which actually transitions us beautifully from community management to historical preservation. because this brings us to the actual sign-off of the text.
Yes, the final wrap-up.
The narrative shifts into self-reference. It says, "This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true."
And the shift to the plural we there is particularly noteworthy.
What does that signify?
It indicates that John is not just a lone, rogue historian writing in a vacuum. He is writing from within a community of early believers who are collectively vouching for the authenticity of his testimony. It's basically an ancient form of peer review.
That's incredible. And then we get this final, massive hyperbole, the very last verse that the text says. Now, there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. We started this chapter looking at microscopic, mundane details, exactly 153 fish, a specific type of charcoal,
Right.
and we end with an infinite cosmic exaggeration. So what does this all mean for the listener? Why the sudden shift in scale?
It reveals the author's underlying methodology. He was a ruthless curator.
A curator.
Yeah. Out of an endless sea of miracles, debates, and private conversations, John selected highly specific elements to build an intentional narrative. In historical archiving, if you try to record absolutely everything, you overwhelm the reader. An archive that cannot be contained is an archive that cannot be utilized.
Right, an information dump is not a story. It doesn't guide the reader anywhere.
Exactly. He specifically referred to the recorded events in his text as signs. They were not just random occurrences. They were curated data points pointing toward a larger thesis. He gave the reader the essential framework necessary for belief, nothing less and nothing more.
He edited out the noise so the signal could get through. You know, for you, the listener, I think there's an incredibly grounding reality to take away from this textual analysis today. When we study history at this granular level, we see that the most profound identity-altering moments do not happen in sterile, perfectly lit, pristine environments.
No, they rarely do.
They happen in gritty reality. Rebuilding a shattered life happens while eating freshly caught fish, sitting in soaking wet clothes, smelling the acrid smoke of a charcoal fire. Redemption meets you in the middle of your everyday, frustrating routine.
The transcendent always intersects with the tangible. That is the entire psychological and historical mechanism of this epilogue.
So here is a final thought for you to turn over in your mind today as you process all of this. If John had to be so ruthless with his editing, if he had to leave out enough material to fill the entire world with books, what beautifully ordinary moments were left on the cutting room floor? What inside jokes did they share on those fishing boats? What casual, deeply human conversations happened on those long, dusty walks between towns that no one ever bothered to write down?
It really makes you wonder.
It does. The historical text gives us the essential architecture, but the silence between the lines is filled with an entire, unrecorded human life. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. God blesses all the listeners. Take care, everyone.